Hi, and welcome to Conversations with Hannah. Today is Tuesday, June 16th, recording to you here from the studio at Shrewsbury Media Connection, and as always, very grateful to Mark, Sarah, and the team here for having me in to record. I wanted to get together and give you an update on what are some of the things that are going on Beacon Hill relative to COVID-19 and looking at some legislation and policy issues, as well as an update on where we're at with the state budget for next year. And also to talk about some of what's gone on in the world since the last time that I've been with you. I thought I would share a little bit, though, of what our family has been up to. It's been a period of a lot of activity on the home front for us. Madison, who was our freshman in college and had to come home early in March, she and I, in late May, drove down to Baltimore to move her out of her dorm. It was a very eerie and desolate dorm building, which was very different than when Jim and I had moved her in at the end of last August. We were the only people on her floor that were allowed in for that period of time to move anyone out. And it was, very well coordinated, but I'm very much hoping that we can return her to campus in late August this year, and she can be back with her fellow students enjoying some of campus life. Although we do know no matter what is going to happen, if they're able to go back, it will look different. A lot of the colleges and universities are thinking about having kids go to class, sort of half the class one day a week, and the other half gets to go the other day of the week. And then the half that is not in the classroom would be participating virtually in their dorm room. So I think it's going to look very different for our kids that are going back to school in the fall, but I'm very much hopeful that they can get back and experience being on a college campus. Our daughter Caitlin graduated from Shrewsbury High School. A very different experience graduation-wise than what we experienced just a year ago with Madison, but very grateful to the Shrewsbury Public Schools, in particularly Todd Bazidlo, the principal, and the assistant principals at the high school, and everyone else who was a part of coming up with the plan to celebrate our seniors in a way that both adhered to the public health guidelines, but also celebrated this milestone achievement for them. I think of all of the memories that were created this year, our family favorite one will be the last ride. It was an incredible time driving up the long driveway to the high school and seeing a sign, 501 signs actually put out for each and every graduate, and then coming around the corner into the parking lot and seeing all the members of the Shrewsbury High School staff and team out there cheering on the kids and waving to them. We took a lot of pictures from the car. We saw a lot of people that we were grateful to see that we hadn't seen for months. But it was just a really fantastic memory. And one I've heard some juniors say that they're hoping the high school continues with next year, even if they're back to normal graduation activities, which means it obviously is something that was felt not just by the seniors right now, but it was a joyful moment for all of us involved in it. So as a parent of a graduating senior, I'm very appreciative to all that was done to celebrate our seniors. Caitlin is hoping to head to Endicott College in the fall to study criminal justice, so we're excited for her. And then finally, Patrick today, it's last day of school. 8th grader at Oak had his 8th grade celebration today, 8 green. Again, we sat at home and watched it as a family. Was very excited. Patrick won the social studies team award, which is fun. He gets a lot of information between Jim and I thrown at him at home on what's happening both in the community at the state level and nationally, and he's very keen and interested in that. So it was fun to see him get that award. But it's hard to believe I now have a child, my youngest, being in high school. So I'm going to hopefully savor these last 4 years with him at home. And he will hopefully appreciate being home along with Jim and I for the next 4 years as well. As much excitement as went on, over the course of the last month for our family, it was also a course for not only for our family, but for our community and our nation to think about the aspects of what happened with the killing of George Floyd. Madison and I actually driving down to Baltimore to retrieve her belongings at school, basically had on the news the whole way listening to what was happening in our country. And it was very challenging to listen to, and yet it was also very important to listen to. I have been really heartened by a lot of what I've seen, by our country coming together. And one of the things that we did in the legislature on June 4th during our session, we had a moment of silence. And that day, I put a statement up on Facebook, and I thought what I would do is read the statement that I wrote at the time, because I'm pretty sure my statement today without reading from this would not be as hopefully as thoughtful as what I believe my words were on that day, trying to take into consideration all that was upon us as a nation. So on June 4th, the House of Representatives joined with the NAACP in a moment of silence for 8 minutes and 46 seconds in honor of the life of George Floyd and his last horrific moments on earth as he begged for mercy and received none. Tragically, Mr. Floyd's death was not a singular instance of taking the life of a Black person, a fellow citizen of our country. It is an injustice and indignity suffered far too long by far too many. Dr. King's statement that he hoped for the day that Black children would be judged not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character, still remains an unfulfilled hope for many Black parents. In a nation that professes to provide equal rights for all citizens, we still have miles to go. The promise and premise of our nation is out of reach and unfulfilled for some, and when the rights of any American citizen is denied, the rights of all of us are also vulnerable. As my father recently wrote in a message to his school community, it's never a time to be silent on this topic. These rights are threatened for all of us when the words and actions of others seemingly give license for this abhorrent behavior. The children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren of all Americans, at all levels nuanced to their age and circumstance, wonder and worry about what to make of all of it. What does this portend for them, for their family, for society, and for their future? It's difficult enough for adults to comprehend, even more so for the young, the most precious among us. As a mom, I watched my own children try to navigate the complexities of this moment, from attempting to comprehend why someone in a position of authority could take a life in bold daylight over the course of 8 minutes and 46 seconds with no one intervening to stop the heinous murder, to how to show support for the Black Lives Matter movement and take action to say that we can and must be better as a nation and as a people. I'm proud of my daughter, Caitlin, who organized a peaceful protest in Shrewsbury, along with 2 friends. And at the same time, I worry that those who perpetrate violence as a mean to sow discord are actively seeking to further divide us. As a woman of faith who serves on the board of Andover Newton Seminary and was raised to believe that we're all God's children, I cannot comprehend how one can cavalierly take a life and why the color of our skin has so often determined the outcome of our lives. And while I understand that I've been fortunate to never know the pain that so many fellow Americans have experienced, I don't take comfort in it, and I recognize the inequality and inequity. As a citizen of our country, I look to our leaders for leadership and empathy, sense and purpose to this long struggle we've failed at so many times, and to illuminate a path forward. When our nation comes to crossroads, it's imperative that those who accepted the burdens of office do not falter. And as a legislator, I've focused my work each and every day on improving all people's lives. I've long understood the many ways in which racial disparities shine most flagrantly, from the impact of social determinants on public health, to educational opportunity and achievement, to lack of access to food, to the significantly higher infant and maternal death rates for Black Americans. I've tried to be part of legislative efforts to tackle these issues, and yet I know there's more I can do and more I will do. And I know from the many emails sent to me from residents of Shrewsbury and Westboro that so many yearn to be part of moving our community, Commonwealth, and country forward to be a more just society, to a place where we realize Dr. King's dream, not just write about it. And while it's easy to lay blame at the feet of others, each and every one of us, each and every day, has a responsibility to commit ourselves to making our country more just and live up to the ideals our nation was formed on. There's not one to-do list. There's not one action to take. It's the responsibility It is not the responsibility of one profession, one race, or one person. It's a burden we all share. Over the course of the last few weeks, I've talked to many people in Shrewsbury and Westboro. I've participated in the peaceful protest in Shrewsbury and attended vigils in Shrewsbury and Westboro. I've been inspired by our young people who have worked to help our communities stand together, and I've been moved by the number of people coming out in solidarity. I've stressed in all of my interactions that the place we find ourselves in today, the place we all agree is not reflective of who we strive to be as a nation, is not the responsibility of one profession, one race, or one person. It's a burden we all share. We need to be careful that we do not make sweeping and generalized statements that lump all police officers into one bucket and disparage those who've worked hard to uphold our common values in their professional and personal capacities as police officers and members of our communities. This doesn't mean that there's not more that we can do. But as my legislative colleague and former member of the state police, Representative Tim Whalen, noted recently in a Facebook post, the wholesale attacks on the integrity and honor of all who serve is wrong. Let's work together to become a nation reflective of our shared vision and mindful of the powerful words written by Dr. King in his letter from Birmingham jail in April of 1963, in which he said, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly." I hope that in the next period of time, the legislature will move forward with the promise to address some of the issues before us relative to racism and how we can be better as a Commonwealth in terms of use of force. I will remind folks, just as I've been reminded, that we have some of the most progressive policies in the nation regarding police, and that we are very fortunate to live in the Commonwealth where we have already done work on this issue. But there's more that we can and will do, and I will certainly be sure to communicate the actions that were taken. I was very pleased last night to meet with the Shrewsbury Police Department, members of the union, to get their perspective as well on what are some of the things that we've been talking about doing as a legislature and what their opinion on that is, and feedback, and what are some of their own ideas on things that we should be thinking about. And I'm grateful to have had the time with them as well. And I hope that anyone who has thoughts on this issue will contact me, whether it is calling me or sending me an email or through Facebook. I continue to have an open ear to listening to all perspectives on these issues, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to hear from people. As we turn to other things going on across the Commonwealth, one of the things that I talked about a little bit earlier in terms of graduation, we have given guidance. The Baker-Polito administration put out guidance relative to the opportunity to have outdoor celebrations of graduation after July 19th. We're hoping the public health data will still warrant that. There's no reason to believe there won't be at this point. I know Shrewsbury is looking towards, I believe, Saturday, July 25th as a target date for having an outdoor celebratory graduation ceremony that I'm looking forward to. But we are recognizing that there should be a period of time this summer where some of the things that needed to be curtailed during graduation ceremonies in May and June may in fact be celebrated outside. So there are standards that the Baker-Polito administration has put forth on that. And we will look forward to hopefully being able to have that in our community as well. There are 6 public health indicators that we're tracking right now that are helping form the basis of opinion on the reopening plan. Those 6 factors that we're tracking include the positive test rate of COVID-19, testing capacity, as well as contact tracing capabilities. And there are 3 colors assigned to where we're at relative to these parameters. So green is go, meaning we're on a good path for that. Yellow is sort of cautiously optimistic that we seem to be moving in the right direction, but it isn't a solid track record yet. And red is indicative of where we're not making the progress that we need to make. On those first three indicators that I spoke of, the COVID-19 positive test rate, the testing capacity, and the contact tracing capabilities, we are in green on those three things. We are making good progress. There are three more criteria by which we're in the yellow category on still. So we are very much keeping a close eye on them, and the trends yet don't form enough positive movement to indicate that they're green, but those three items that we're tracking in the yellow category are the number of individuals who have passed away from COVID-19, the number of patients with COVID-19 in the hospitals, as well as the healthcare system readiness. So we're in a far better position than we were back in April or May, but we're not at the place where we would say we are out of the woods there yet. And so those are cautiously moving in the right direction. We will continue to track those, and if you do go on and look at the report that is sent out about every day, it's posted on mass.gov, of the daily indicators, you will see those on there, as well as about a 24-page report on many of the different things that we're tracking across the Commonwealth. And then once a week, on Wednesdays, there's a broader report that's put out, which also reports on the data that we have for every single community in the Commonwealth. That report is about a 66 page report right now, but that is where you would see every community in the Commonwealth with the number of people who have passed away from those communities from COVID-19 reported on. And again, you can go to mass.gov and go to the reopening section, and you will find the daily reports and the weekly reports there. In addition, the testing plan for the Commonwealth has been something that's had a lot of focus on it. We had our testing plan sent in to the federal government to indicate what we're doing to make sure that we are going to have enough testing in place over the long haul until we can get to a place with a vaccine. Right now, we're currently doing around 1,000 tests a day to 1,600 tests a day. We're going to be going up to 45,000 tests a day by the end of July, and up to 75,000 a day by the end of December. We're also looking at, right now we measure two test factors, both the test to see if someone's positive for COVID-19, as well as the antibody testing levels that we're doing and seeing what percent of the population that is being tested for antibodies is coming back as having indicated presence of them. We will continue to, again, ramp up that testing on both aspects very, very quickly here in the Commonwealth. You also will see right now opportunities for people who have participated in large-scale group activities over the last few weeks, whether that was a protest or a vigil. We set up 50 testing spots around the Commonwealth for people to go in and get tested so that we can determine quickly whether or not any of that additional close activity manifested into a higher percentage of COVID-19 testing positive. That is something that we're going to need to watch very closely over the next couple of weeks. In addition, you likely saw that the CVS in Shrewsbury, which early on had been a testing center, has reopened, although this time the testing is not being done in outside in a tent. It is being conducted through the drive-through. CVS is across the Commonwealth opening up more and more of these testing facilities. The early ones chosen were areas that had drive-throughs that weren't having a high percent of use for the typical drive-through pharmacy. Part of that in Shrewsbury for us is, of course, because we have 2 drive-through locations for Shrewsbury. So this newer one that had been recently opened still had a low number of people using the drive-through for picking up and dropping off for the pharmacy. So they're able to conduct about 50 tests a day there. You do need to make an appointment to do that, and it is a self-swab. So when you're there getting the test, you are being watched by a nurse or pharmacist through the window to make sure you're performing the test correctly on yourself. And then when they sign off that you have, you're pulling forward a little bit and putting your enclosed test kit into an outside area where they are then collected and taken to Quest Diagnostics for the testing, and results are usually within 2 to 3 days at this point. So if you do need to have a test because you believe that you have symptoms or that you had close exposure to somebody, you need to go online to cbs.com and set up an appointment, and then you can go do that very close to home here locally. In addition, we're still having the robust community contract tracing perspective capability that the Commonwealth has set up. So if you do test positive, you are going to be followed up by somebody who will want to inquire about who else you may have been in close proximity to over a short period of time before you found out that you were positive for COVID-19. And then work is done to make sure that we reach out to those people who may have been exposed to alert them and to help them get a test if they need one, and to understand what to be on the lookout for. So we are right now in the midst of our reopening plan. We're in phase 2, step 1, the phase 2, which each of the 4 phases is set to be at least 3 weeks, hopefully only 3 weeks. And that was true on from phase 1 to phase 2. But right now we had phase 2 broken into 2 steps, which was an effort to be able to expedite some of what had initially been pegged for phase 3, being able to come into phase 2. So you saw in the first phase of 4, which was the starting phase, there are 4 labels for it: the sort of start, cautious, vigilant, and new normal. Right now, in addition to the phase 1 opening of manufacturing and construction and worship, in phase 2, step 1, we've seen lab and life science facilities reopen, office space, hair salons and barbershops, which are someplace I myself have now frequented, thankfully, pet grooming, car washes, recreation, and some outdoor aspects have been able to reopen, as well as some retail. What is not open yet and what is scheduled to be looked at in the second part of phase 2 would be indoor restaurant service. On June 8th, when Caitlin got her diploma, we were the first family at Burton's in Shrewsbury, which had just opened for seating outside that day. It was very easy to partake in outdoor seating. And I'm happy to see a lot of area restaurants are able to have outdoor seating open up, as well as some are making some more seating available. And the towns are working closely with restaurants to enable that to happen. And hopefully in step 2 of phase 2, we will have indoor restaurant seating open up as well. And I know that there are a lot of restaurants that are very anxious for that to happen. Additionally, in step 2, some of the items such as nail salons and tanning beds and things like that are also scheduled to be able to be open. I know myself, having been part of the discussions, like many of you, hearing about what's opening, it's been challenging. There are things that a lot of us would like to see open sooner. But I can assure you that this is a decision that's being driven by public health. And so when we think about those 6 public health indicators that are there, a lot of what we're seeing in public health data is informing the plan to reopen. The Baker-Polito administration realizes that not everyone's going to be happy with their plan, and they also have a portal by which anyone can provide feedback to them, whether it's concerns, questions, your own thoughts on how they should consider reopening. They're welcoming all of that in. I know my office as well has heard a lot of feedback. We've worked closely with childcare facilities and a lot of the struggles that they had with some of the opening guidance they were given on how that they could reopen. Some of that has since been looked at again, and there's been a little bit more flexibility given to that. But this is purely a challenging time. There's no easy way to say it. This is not a reopening plan that any one entity or industry or person was going to look at and absolutely think it was entirely right. We're all going to have our own opinions on it. I would ask that you do share your opinion because the feedback is helpful. I would also ask that you do recognize that there's been a lot of hard work that's gone into this by the Baker-Polito administration and a lot of thoughtful work. And while we may have each our own opinion on whether or not it's the right plan, I'm very hopeful that given the public health trends that we're seeing right now, that we are going to continue on pace for each phase to continue opening within a 3-week period of time from the last phase opening. Again, where we're at right now and what has opened under phase 2, step 1 includes all of our outdoor restaurant service, hotels and other lodgings, warehouse and distribution centers, youth and adult amateur sports. Some of that has reopened while you can't necessarily do contact. There are some practices and things that can happen. I know that my daughter, who participates in the 1727 facility on Route 9, has gone back to doing outdoor exercise in the parking lot. And it has been a welcome for her to be back with the folks that she enjoys seeing and working out with. So the plan will continue. You can go to www.mass.gov/reopening and see all aspects of the plan. And more data is put up there every day on what is opening up further and more guidance. So I encourage you to revisit more than once. And please, as I stress, do give your own feedback to the plan according to what you think is right and according to what you think needs to be worked on. The MBTA is increasing the service back up to 85% starting on June 22nd. While we have started to see an uptick in ridership and use of public transportation, it's certainly nowhere near the level that it was at pre-pandemic, but they will continue to increase service. And they do want to make sure that everyone who can wear a mask is wearing a mask, and as much as possible adhering to still allowing for distance between yourselves in any public transportation that you may take. One of the positive pieces of news that has occurred in the last month or so was news that we got from MassDOT that the $15.4 million intersection plan at where most of us know Valenti Drive and Route 20, sort of near the Christmas Tree Shops Plaza and the Y driveway, has been accepted as a project. It doesn't mean it all is fully funded yet, but it is on the MassDOT plan as a project right now, which means they're moving into design work. This comes out of the study that we did over the course of 3 years on Route 20, stretching from the Northborough border Route 20 all the way to the Worcester border Route 20, in what needs to happen on that stretch of road, both from a public safety perspective, but also to build out from a capacity perspective of the additional traffic that's using it now, as well as what we anticipate over the next 20 years. The intersection that is at Valenti Drive and Route 20 was one of the areas, as well as the Walnut Street coming out just past that, one of the areas that we were most focused on and worried about in this Route 20 plan, and so that has been prioritized as the first project that we're attempting to push through with MassDOT. So over the course of the next year, they will be doing the design work to turn that into an intersection with traffic lights there, as well as to allow some changes, hopefully to put in a road that would go from Valenti Drive over to Walnut Street, which would allow people who are using Walnut Street to go to a signalized light to get access to Route 20 rather than trying to take their life in their own hands and exit out onto Route 20 traffic, which is a fairly blind exit onto Route 20 there from Walnut Street. We've obviously seen a lot of traffic increase on that Walnut Street road from coming from the commuter rail access down in Westboro as well. So very good news on that front. We'll continue to keep you updated as I have on the progress of our work on Route 20, but was very pleased to see the MassDOT team move that project into their list of approved projects that they are now working on. Also last month, I spent some time talking to the 1540 organization. I recorded a short 10-minute video with them talking about what are some of the things that we're seeing in healthcare right now. And 1540 organization, as you likely know, is very much concerned with early detection and making sure that we are detecting cancer early enough so that we are able to fight back and to beat it and to move into remission and then continue to lead out our lives. And one of the things that has been a particular challenge is making sure that people pay attention to their body and recognize that any subtle change over the course of a week or two that is persistent is something that should be raised to the level of having a conversation with a doctor. During the pandemic, many people curtailed any sort of interaction with the medical community for fear of wanting to go into a healthcare setting. We also obviously gave a lot of messages out from state government asking people to curtail that activity as well by curtailing elective surgeries and things of that nature. But one of the things that we're concerned about now is making sure that people who did put off either making phone calls or having diagnostic testing done do immediately do so. Get in touch with your doctors. We did authorize telehealth, and telehealth is still actually authorized to be used right now. So you don't necessarily even have to go in and have a first appointment with your doctor, but you do need to call your doctor and talk to them about any potential changes that you've noticed in your own health over the last few months when we haven't been able to access healthcare in the manner that we've been accustomed to beforehand. So I had an opportunity to talk to the 1540 organization about the importance of that and my own visiting into the healthcare system. I've mentioned before, my middle daughter Caitlin has 2 chronic diseases. She needs infusions every 4 weeks, and she gets chemo once a week, which fortunately is done via shot at home, but the infusions are done in a hospital setting. So throughout the course of the pandemic, every 4 weeks, we were in at the floating hospital for children, and I was amazed and really impressed at all the ways the hospital system set up processes to keep folks who needed to access the hospital system for non-COVID-19 related issues safe and secure. And the changes that were also made to make sure that they were kept as physicians and nurses and staff there protected as well. So again, the hospital system is ready and able to deal with any issue that you have now. So please don't put off making any important phone calls or setting up appointments. If you haven't been feeling well, please do get help to check that out. As I mentioned earlier, on the state level, we still have not entered into budget discussions for fiscal year 21. There's a lot of certainly conversations going on, but the House and Senate have not debated a budget yet. We're really primarily waiting on 2 things at this moment. One, trying to understand what is happening at the federal level. There has been work on a 4th piece of legislation currently called the HEROES Act, which does include in it, in what was passed in the House and is pending in the Senate, significant dollars that would help not only the states but also the municipalities and help both with town operations as well as education monies. We're waiting to find out what happens with that. It is pending in the Senate. It hasn't been taken up there yet. There has been some, I guess, progress, I would say, this week relative to the president indicating he would be open to a bill and scoping out what he thinks the appropriate size of that might be. So we're very much hopeful now that perhaps the Senate can start to give some movement on that bill. But it's difficult for us as a state to move forward with a budget without understanding what might be entailed in a federal piece of legislation. We're also waiting to understand where we think we might be bottoming out in the tax revenue impact. The losses from what we had, back in January anticipated having as available revenue to build a budget cycle on to now is very different. The Mass Taxpayers Foundation initially in April had thought it would be somewhere around $4.5 billion hit. They have now revised that to be $6 billion and potentially higher hit. So we are working to understand that number as well. The most likely scenario at the moment is that we will pass 1/12 budgets for July and August, and then take up a budget based on information that we have through the end of August. My personal perspective would be I would rather wait until we have September tax revenue in. September is a large revenue collection month, and I think at that point we would have the best level of knowledge to base a fiscal year 21 budget on. One of the reasons we want to get it as right as possible is because we would not want to create a budget that we would then need to scale back even further and potentially have to do what's called 9C cuts, which would always potentially impact local aid and education budgets. So it's something as a member of the House Ways and Means Committee that I will be working on once we have clear guidance, but we're not there just yet. Likewise, the town of Shrewsbury, I know, is also taking a wait and see to see the guidance that will come from the state, because on a local level, we also don't want to put a budget into place that potentially could be far outside the realm of either higher or lower than what we end up getting in available revenue to us from the state or from the federal efforts that are underway. There have also been a number of legislation pieces that have moved through the House lately. 2 weeks ago, we voted on a piece of voting legislation that would give some expanded access in terms of ways in which people can vote in the upcoming September primary and November general election for president, as well as for the state races here in the Commonwealth. We will be having more come out on that once that legislation passes the Senate. The House passed our version. The Senate is debating this week their version. If they're very different, we'll have to go to a conference committee and iron out some of those differences. We really have a short window because Secretary of State Galvin needs to understand what the requirements are going to be on his office, because very quickly after the 1st of July is when they move forward with printing ballots and understanding what is going to be necessary when. And if we have earlier voting than we traditionally would on a primary ballot, they will need to have those ballots available even earlier. So I think it's pretty safe to say that we will have an extended period of time to vote early for both the primary and for the general election. And the way that the House bill was constructed would be to send out an application, absentee ballot, to registered voters in the Commonwealth. And if people want to take advantage of voting that way, they could then send it back in, and their local town would send them a ballot. As well as, in addition to being able to mail in your ballot, you would be able to vote early in person, and you would still be able to vote on election day. We also alleviated in the House version, when you go to vote, you notice you always have to check in and say your address and then check out and give your address again. We did give the flexibility that you wouldn't have to, when you are checking out, restate your address again. You would just be able to hand in and put into the machine what you have voted. So we will continue to monitor that. And I know that the governor is keen to get something on his desk to get that signed into law as well. We also passed a restaurant relief bill in the House, and the Senate is going to be taking that up. That would, among other things, give quicker access to alcohol service outdoors, particularly for a restaurant that might have only had an indoor service for alcohol. This would give more flexibility to more quickly enable a local city or town to allow them to have alcohol service outside. It also caps fees on third-party service companies. So you may have ordered from DoorDash or an entity like that. Some of those companies take up to 30% the cost of the meal that you're paying. So it's money that's coming right away from the restaurant, and the margins are already pretty tight on restaurants. This piece of legislation would cap at 15% what those delivery entities are able to charge or to take out of the overall bill that a restaurant is giving to you. We also, in that, would allow mixed drinks to be sent home like we currently do with beer and wine unopened if you are ordering out from a restaurant. So there's some additional flexibilities in there for restaurants to allow them some more ways in which to conduct their business during this period of time. We also passed a municipal governance bill, and that was signed into law by the governor on June 5th. That gave some additional flexibility to when cities and towns can hold municipal elections. It gives them up till August 1st. It also provides additional flexibilities for holding town meeting. In Shrewsbury, we've pushed our town meeting already to the end of June, and I believe that is now going to be pushed into August. Before we had some of these new laws in the books, we weren't able to do things like that, but we have signed 2 municipal governance pieces into law in the last couple of months that have enabled cities and towns to have additional flexibility on holding town meetings. It also decreases quorum requirements so that if we aren't able to get our full quorum, which in Shrewsbury, we have 240 town meeting members. We need 121 to have quorum. This would decrease that quorum requirement a bit. So again, we have some additional flexibility on holding that. It also would provide us, again, flexibility to carry over budgets from one year into the next. So to adopt a 1/12 budget on the municipal level, which is not something that we otherwise would have had a capability to do. One of the questions I've been asked a lot about is bottle redemption. We now are back and able to use bottle redemption at the reverse vending machines. That began on June 5th. And then over-the-counter is set to resume on June 19th. Many folks had asked about that. There is a limit to returning 120 bottles and cans at a time, so you might have to make several trips if you're a family who has stored up bottles over the last couple of months, but you should be able to access both the vending machines and on the in-person over-the-counter returning soon. I will also make a plug for it's also good to hold those bottles when the Boy Scouts have their efforts to collect them and redeem those dollars as well. So if you don't feel like rushing out to do this right away, I know there will be another Boy Scout can drive at some point in the future, which I'm sure they'd be grateful for your donations as well. I've been spending quite a bit of my time still working on food security issues. Since we last came together for an update, the governor convened a food security task force. There were 2 legislators as part of that. I was one of them, and my colleague in the Senate, Senator Joanne Comerford, was also a member of the legislative delegation on that team. She and I are also co-chairs and co-founders of the Food System Caucus that we have in the legislature, which is 132 members of the legislature. So over the course of a few weeks in April and into May, the Food Security Task Force worked diligently really around 4 priority areas. 1, developing and implementing an emergency food program. So in areas of the Commonwealth where we were particularly hard hit with an inability to get folks getting out to grocery stores or didn't have the ability for online ordering and delivery. We developed a very quick rapid response sort of emergency food program. We also looked to fortify the food banks, which were, again, seeing record demand needed from them in terms of food supply. And also maximizing the federal resources for food and nutrition. So working with our federal partners, the USDA, trying to make sure that as many people as were eligible to participate in SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Program, we were able to make sure folks were aware of it and to enroll them in that. And those dollars that are spent on that program are federal dollars. So the Commonwealth is in charge of using that program at the local level, state level, but the dollars that fund that come from the federal level. And then finally, also reinforcing and redeploying the food system infrastructure here in the Commonwealth. The marine fisheries, the seafood, were deeply impacted by what has gone on because 70% of the catch that would come in would traditionally go right to institutional sales and mostly restaurants. And when restaurants shut down, you can imagine the impact on the fishing industry. So we also have had the impact certainly to farmers as well, who would have sold a significant amount of their produce into institutional sales, like for colleges and universities. When they shuttered, particularly the UMass system sent all their students home, UMass Amherst has always had a really robust program for buying locally produced food. That was a deep blow to our farmers as well. So we had to look at, what are the needs there, and how do we help, and how do we, in particular, work through the supply chain issues that are there. Again, a lot of the way that food was packaged to go to institutional settings and not into individual servings to go to a food grocery store. And so there was help that was needed on that end, as well as learning how to sell in direct to consumer, where before a majority of their market would have been through the wholesalers who would then sell their products into the smaller settings. Last week, we announced a $36 million food infrastructure grant program tailored exactly towards some of those uses. So farmers, fishermen can apply and use these dollars for capital infrastructure uses. So if they need to buy new machines that can help them package differently, if they need to have an expansion of, let's say, materials that they need to have a more robust farmers market. If they're now trying to sell more directly to consumers, they can use those dollars for things like that. We're also looking at expanding the Healthy Incentives Program, which is a really amazing program here in the Commonwealth that allows people who use SNAP to, at a farmers market or through a CSA or a mobile market, purchase food that is grown, fruits and vegetables that are grown locally. And for every dollar spent on those locally produced foods, they get the dollar back on, and they can use that for another reason on their SNAP card. So we have $5 million that is being allocated for the actual incentives of that to increase the amount of funding we have for the incentives. And we also have this infrastructure grant program to allow more farmers markets and mobile markets and CSAs to have the infrastructure technology that they need to participate in that program. So that is a win not only for people who do not have enough access to food, it is also a win for our farmers who can see, again, an expansion of market share into folks who in the past might not have purchased fresh, locally grown food because the cost was prohibitive as compared to what they can use their SNAP dollars for in a grocery store for a canned option. In addition, we've been working a lot on the fact that when schools closed, that was really difficult for the over 500,000 students who rely on the schools' sites for their breakfast and lunch. And the schools have done a really terrific job in working to keep those programs open. We did just seek guidance and permission from the federal government to include those expanded food sites over the summer, not to have to shut them down at the end of the school year. That was something that the USDA granted permission for, which we're very grateful. But it's a real challenge for families who have relied on access to food through the school system for their young kids at home. And so we also have what's now called the PEBT card, pandemic EBT, which is also being sent to eligible young people so that through the summer months they can also use those dollars in a grocery store at a farmer's market as well to get access to food that they will need. The work that we're doing on food insecurity is not going to stop anytime soon. We recognize that the effects of the pandemic, both from a public health perspective, but also the economic hit, are going to be with us for a period of time, and we have seen a tremendous amount of growth of need in terms of access to these food insecurity programs. So we will be working on this at the state level for the months and probably years to come. And I look forward to being a part of working on those issues. And as much as of the work that we're doing at the state level, there's also a lot of work that we've been doing at the local level. I was very pleased to work with the town manager in Shrewsbury to engage with St. Anne's to think how we can support the food pantry there. And you'll see some more stuff happening around that perspective. I'm also very pleased to let folks know that we are going to be able to hold our golf tournament this year, the Hannah Kane Charity Classic, which has traditionally benefited 3 of our community partners, Westboro Food Pantry, St. Anne's Human Services, and Shrewsbury Youth and Family Services. The golf tournament is going to be held on Monday, August 17th. We're thrilled to have Howard Grossman of Grossman Development Group as our presenting sponsor again this year, and really thankful that almost every single sponsor who's been with us in the past has stepped forward to be with us, as well as the golfers participating. We know that the need on these 3 community organizations is very strong, and we want to be able to supply them with the additional dollars that they need to help folks in our own community, whether it's folks who need access to food, or it's folks that are needing access to mental health services. The pandemic has had a great impact on isolation for people. Many people, again, were not accessing services that they may have needed for mental health over the course of the last few months. And we want to be able to ensure that anyone who needs services in our community has access to them. So we will be looking at making another strong donation to each of those 3 charities in August to support their efforts over the coming year. And I will certainly continue to support them in whatever capacity I can do as both a legislator and also as a member of the community. I also wanted to touch on the fact of the RMV. That has been another source of significant email traffic and phone calls to me in my office over the last few months. The RMV is expanding service back again. Certainly, it's probably not as quickly as anyone who is dependent on the RMV for something to get done would like to see, but they are having expanded appointment hours. More of the service centers are opening up, and some things are being retooled to deal with some of the constraints. So we have an online learner's permit now for those kids who are ready to get their learner's permit. And we're also doing some more around online license renewals. We're also giving a break on the cost of getting a real ID further on. So if you had been interested in doing a real ID, we've moved out the deadline for real ID compliance another year, but we've also said that if you wanted to go forward and just get a typical license renewed, when you do go to get a real ID, that cost will be cut in half if you're eligible for that program. So we also have a 21-day grace period right now for registering transfers after a vehicle purchase. What typically would have been a 7-day window has been expanded to a 21-day window at the moment in time. And we've also done some changes to the requirements around observation hours for students who have their permit and have gone through and are getting their schooling, whether it's where my kids went to CMSC in West Boylston or through another entity. Typically will require you to have 12 hours behind the wheel yourself with somebody, your trainer riding with you, and then you had to have 6 hours in the back seat watching another young person driving. We've removed that 6 hours of observation from the back seat right now, given the public health issues. And instead, what we've done is added those 6 hours onto the 40-hour requirement of you driving supervised with a parent or guardian or another adult over age 21. So whereas in the past that would have been a 40-hour requirement, that is now going to be 46 hours, just to make sure that you have the right amount of exposure to driving and to witness driving. So again, I would encourage people who have any sort of business necessary before the RMV to go on to mass.gov/RMV, and you can find out a lot more information. I would also encourage you to expand if you do have something that needs to be done at a service center. Expand the service centers that you might be looking at. I do know from some folks who have contacted us I believe the Pittsfield Service Center had hours where they could quickly go get something taken care of. I do recognize that is a further drive, but if you absolutely need something done, you may find open hours for appointments in some of the non-traditional service centers you wouldn't have looked at before to have access to that. I also wanted to mention that one of the things that we do every year is celebrate what we are now calling Commonwealth Heroines. The Massachusetts Commission on the Status of Women in the past had called this award an Unsung Heroine Award. They've renamed it the Commonwealth Heroine Award now. In Shrewsbury, I was very pleased to join with my colleague, Senator Mike Moore, in nominating Kim Pettengill Long for the award, and she has been awarded the Commonwealth Heroine Award for a lot of the activity that she has undertaken over the years. She has been very, very active in Shrewsbury Youth and Family Services for many years, recently has stepped down as a board member after very long service to SYFS. She's also been very active in making sure that we are all aware of the impacts of gun violence and doing what we can to lessen that. And I really applaud her for all of those efforts that she's put in. And I also was happy to see that a woman I nominated, Westboro resident Maureen Johnson, awarded as a Commonwealth Heroine Award too, and grateful for her service in Westboro. Almost anything I've been to in my time in Westboro has either seen Maureen being a part of it or there to help celebrate it as a community. And so very grateful for her work on the turkey trot and supporting the schools, as well as her work on the Cultural Council and the Westboro Police Foundation that was formed this past year. Really grateful for all of her work in our community as well. As I end this update, which I understand probably listening to has seemed long and rambling, and if you've made it this far, I'm really grateful for your attention span. I do want to reiterate that my office, even though the State House is not open right now, my office is open each and every day. Anna Darrow, who works with me, is helping people through unemployment issues. If you still find yourself having any challenges to deal with unemployment, please do contact us. We are happy to work through those issues with you or any other issue, whether it's around the reopening plan, around questions with the RMV. Even if you're not entirely sure if we're the right people to ask the question, don't hesitate to ask us. We're always happy to help get information to people or redirect if we know that there's another party who can help them. I'm grateful to all the folks who have reached out over the last few months. And I encourage you to continue to do so as we move forward into the next few months. I do hope, too, that people will take advantage of the opportunity to get outside. I know that it's been a really stressful few months. Some people are finding it fearful to venture back outside for the fear of the unknown. I will tell you that I think July and August are going to be opportune times to get outside and try and find some semblance of normalcy because I do want to be prepared that until we do have a vaccine, we may find ourselves challenged again in the fall. So as much as humanly possible, enjoy the summer months. I'm very hopeful that we will see in the fall an ability to send our kids back to school. There may be some sort of mix of having to do some in school and some online, but we are doing a lot of work at the state level to be prepared in the event there is a next wave of COVID-19. But I think the summer months are optimal for all of us to get outside and enjoy life as much as humanly possible, given these strange times that we're living in. As always, I'm grateful for the opportunity to serve as your state representative. Westboro and Shrewsbury are really amazing communities, and I am, again, always heartened to see what goes on in our communities for people helping each other. And so for those folks who have devoted time during this pandemic to helping others, thank you. Whether that was making masks or helping supply things to our first responders, or quite simply helping out a neighbor who was in a vulnerable position by helping them get food. Thank you for each and every action that you've taken to be part of our community, working together to remain strong during this pandemic. Enjoy July and August. I will be back with you for an update in the next few months. Take care.